I was wandering through the winding streets of the city, my mind buzzing with thoughts of overdue bills and a dead-end job. It was a chilly evening, the kind where the cold seeps into your bones despite the layers of clothing. The sky was a dull gray, and a light drizzle began to fall, making the pavement slick and treacherous. I pulled my coat tighter around me, wishing for a break, any break, from the relentless grind of my daily life. The neon signs of the rundown bars and convenience stores flickered in the damp night, casting eerie reflections on the wet ground. The city felt like a labyrinth of despair, each turn leading to more dead ends. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, the occasional blare of a car horn, but the streets I walked were mostly deserted. That's when I saw him. A man standing under a flickering street lamp, his shadow cast long and ominous in the dim light. He was impeccably dressed in a dark suit that seemed out of place in this part of town. His shoes were polished to a shine, and his hair was neatly combed, giving him an air of authority and confidence. As I drew nearer, he turned his head and our eyes met. There was something unsettling in his gaze, a predatory glint that sent a shiver down my spine. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and inviting, with a faint accent I couldn't place. "You look like a man who could use a bit of luck." I hesitated, but the lure of something, anything, that might change my fortune was too strong to resist. "Yeah, you could say that," I replied cautiously, my curiosity piqued. He smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have something that might interest you." From his coat pocket, he produced a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was an antique, the wood worn smooth with time and use, with symbols etched into its surface that looked ancient and mysterious. "This is a talisman of sorts. It has the power to grant its owner unimaginable wealth." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Sure, and I'm the King of England." His smile widened, showing perfect, gleaming teeth. "I'm quite serious. All I ask in return is a small favor. A token of your appreciation, if you will." "And what kind of favor is that?" I asked, my skepticism wearing with desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. "Nothing you can't handle," he said, his tone almost dismissive. "Do we have a deal?" I glanced at the box, then back at the stranger. What did I have to lose? My life was already a mess. "Deal," I said, extending my hand. He shook it firmly, and the moment our hands touched, I felt a strange energy course through me. It was as if an electric current had passed between us, leaving my skin tingling. He handed me the box, and with a final unsettling smile, disappeared into the shadows, as if he had never been there. When I got home, I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a small, ancient-looking coin. It shimmered in the dim light of my apartment, catching the light in a way that seemed almost otherworldly. The coin was inscribed with symbols similar to those on the box, and it felt warm to the touch, pulsing slightly, as if it were alive. I felt a strange compulsion to keep it close. That night, I dreamt of riches beyond my wildest imagination. Money, luxury, everything I had ever wanted. The next morning, I woke to find my bank account had inexplicably skyrocketed. There were deposits from sources I couldn't trace, amounts that defied logic. At first, I was ecstatic. I paid off all my debts, bought a new car, and moved into a luxurious apartment in the heart of the city. Everything seemed perfect. But then, strange things started to happen. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision. Whispers filled the air when I was alone, and I felt an ever-growing sense of dread. It was as if the coin was cursed, bringing with it not just wealth, but something darker. One night, as I lay in bed, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. I sat up, my breath visible in the icy air. There, at the foot of my bed, stood the stranger, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Enjoying your wealth?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "The favor," he replied simply. "It's time to pay up." "What favor? What do you mean?" I felt a rising panic. He smiled, that cold, predatory smile. "I need a soul, a willing soul, yours." My blood ran cold. No, you can't be serious." "Oh, but I am." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You made a deal, and now it's time to fulfill your end of the bargain." I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The walls seemed to close in around me. "There has to be another way," I pleaded. "Anything." He paused, considering. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "if you find someone else to take your place." Someone else?" I repeated, horrified. "You want me to—" "Choose wisely," he said, his voice echoing in my ears as he vanished, leaving me alone in the freezing room. I spent the next days in a state of paranoia, avoiding friends and family, knowing what was at stake. The shadows grew darker, the whispers louder, and the sense of impending doom unbearable. Finally, desperation took hold. I found myself at a bar, drowning my fear in whiskey, when I noticed a man at the end of the counter, looking as downtrodden as I once did. His name was Mark, and he was struggling, just like I had been. We struck up a conversation, and I found myself telling him about the stranger and the offer, half hoping he'd laugh it off as a joke. But he didn't. Instead, he listened, a spark of hope igniting in his eyes. "Do you still have the coin?" he asked, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and eagerness. I hesitated, then nodded. "But it's dangerous. You don't know what you're getting into." "I don't care," he said, desperation clear in his voice. "I need this." That night, I slept uneasily, haunted by my decision. The stranger didn't visit me again, but the guilt remained. I knew I had condemned another soul to the same fate, but my own life was spared. Weeks passed, and I had heard nothing of Mark. I tried to move on, but the memories lingered. One day, as I walked through the city, I saw a news report on a giant screen. A man had been found dead in his apartment, the cause unknown, but the look of terror on his face was unmistakable. It was Mark. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had traded my soul for his, and now he was gone. The stranger's deal had come full circle, and I was left to live with the consequences of my greed and desperation. As I walked away, I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I saw the stranger once more, his smile as cold and predatory as ever. "Enjoying your second chance?" he asked, his voice sending chills down my spine. I said nothing, knowing there was no escape from the deal I had made. The stranger vanished, but I knew he would always be there, lurking in the shadows, a constant reminder of the price I had paid for my greed. And so, I live each day in fear, knowing that one day the stranger will return, and this time, there will be no one left to take my place. The letter arrived on a Monday morning. The kind of Monday morning where the sun's light struggled to break through a thick veil of clouds. It was from a lawyer, representing the estate of a distant relative I had never known existed. The letter informed me that I had inherited a mansion in a remote part of the countryside. As a struggling artist, the idea of owning a mansion was too tempting to ignore, even if it meant venturing into the unknown. With a mix of curiosity and apprehension, I decided to visit the mansion that weekend, unaware of the dark secrets waiting for me. The mansion emerged from the mist as I approached, its Gothic spires reaching towards the overcast sky like skeletal fingers. Vines and ivy had claimed the stone walls, and the once grand garden was now a wild, untamed jungle. The front door, heavy and ornately carved, groaned as I pushed it open, and the smell of decay greeted me. The air inside was thick with dust, and the dim light from the stained glass windows cast eerie shadows on the walls. As I stepped inside, the creak of the floorboards echoed throughout the vast, empty halls, and a sense of foreboding settled over me. I wandered through the mansion, my footsteps stirring up clouds of dust that danced in the light. Each room seemed to hold its own story, filled with antique furniture, draped in white sheets and mysterious artifacts that hinted at a forgotten past. The atmosphere was oppressive, and the silence was broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures and the distant drip of water. In the dining room, I found an ornate mirror, its surface tarnished with age. As I wiped away the grime, my reflection seemed distorted, almost as if the mirror itself was haunted. I shuddered and moved on, finding myself drawn to a long, dark hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Their eyes seemed to follow me, judging my every move. My exploration led me to a locked door, hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. Intrigued, I searched the nearby drawers and found an old, rusty key. With a sense of trepidation, I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. I hesitated for a moment, then switched on my flashlight and carefully made my way down the stairs. The air grew colder and more musty with each step. At the bottom, I found a dimly lit workshop, the walls lined with shelves filled with life-sized dolls. These were no ordinary dolls. They were eerily lifelike, their glassy eyes reflecting the faint light as if they were watching me. Each one seemed to capture a moment of frozen terror, their expressions disturbingly human. As I moved deeper into the workshop, my flashlight beam caught a glimpse of something scrawled on the wall, partially hidden behind peeling wallpaper. I pulled back the wallpaper, revealing a poem written in a shaky hand.
To purify the souls in peril, I'll capture them in forms so sterile, their innocence preserved in clay, to keep the darkness far away.
The words sent a chill down my spine. I realized that the dolls were more than just lifelike creations. They were the embodiment of the artist's twisted desire to, quote, purify souls that he deemed were in danger. And suddenly it clicked. Their images. I knew them. They were all missing people from the local area. Somehow, the missing people in our area were linked to these dolls, and I had unwittingly stepped into a nightmare. The room's temperature dropped suddenly, and I heard a faint whisper, like the rustle of dry leaves. I turned to see one of the dolls had moved. It was now standing in the center of the room, its lifeless eyes fixed on me. My heart pounded as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Before I could react, the doll lunged at me with surprising speed. I stumbled backward, knocking over a workbench and sending tools clattering to the floor. The doll's strong, cold hands grasped at my ankles, and I kicked it away, scrambling to my feet. I fled the workshop, slamming the door behind me and leaning against it, my mind racing. This was no ordinary house, and I was no longer just an heir exploring an old mansion. I was a target. The mansion seemed to come alive with malevolent intent. Doors that had been open were now locked, and corridors seemed to shift and change, leading me in circles. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps and whispers echoing through the halls, and I knew I wasn't alone. Every room I entered seemed to hold a new trap or challenge, designed to confuse and ensnare me. In the grand library, towering bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient tomes and manuscripts. As I stepped inside, the room began to shrink, the bookshelves closing in on me closer and closer, their edges sharp as razors. I had to maneuver carefully, avoiding the closing shelves while I searched for an exit. In the dining hall, a long table was set for a feast, covered in dust and cobwebs. As I walked by, the chandeliers above began to swing violently, their crystal pendants slamming into each other, shattering and raining down like glass shards. I ducked and weaved through the room, narrowly avoiding the deadly rain. In a lavish sitting room, a grand piano played a haunting melody on its own. The sound grew louder and more discordant, the keys moving faster and faster until they broke free, shooting towards me like deadly projectiles. I dove behind a couch, using it as a shield, and crawled towards the door. As I navigated the treacherous environment, the air grew colder and a thick fog began to seep through the walls, obscuring my vision. The sound of a music box echoed through the halls, its haunting melody growing louder. I turned a corner and found myself face to face with the dollmaker's ghost. He appeared as a tall, gaunt figure, dressed in tattered clothing. His eyes were hollow, and a twisted smile spread across his pale face. His presence radiated an aura of malevolence that chilled me to the bone. He moved towards me with unnatural grace, his movements jerky and puppet-like. As he approached, the dolls in the surrounding rooms began to animate, their heads turning towards us, their glassy eyes glowing with a sinister light. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. The walls seemed to close in, and the floor beneath me creaked and groaned as if it might give way at any moment. I had to find a way to defeat him. But how? Desperate for answers, I stumbled around the mansion until I found what appeared to be the dollmaker's private study. The room was filled with sketches, blueprints, and half-finished dolls. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror. As I approached, the surface shimmered, and I found myself staring into a different time. The mirror showed the dollmaker in his prime, meticulously crafting his dolls. He spoke to them as if they were real people, his obsession with purifying souls evident in his every word and action. The mirror then revealed the tragic fate of those who crossed his path, their souls trapped within the dolls, unable to escape. As I watched, I noticed a hidden compartment in the mirror's frame. I pried it open and found a small, intricately carved box. Inside was a key and a note written in elegant script.
This key unlocks the heart of the curse. Use it wisely.
The note led me to a hidden chamber deep within the mansion. The room was filled with rows of lifelike dolls, each one more terrifying than the last. In the center of the room stood a glass cabinet, and inside was the original doll, the one that started it all. As I reached for the cabinet, the dollmaker's ghost materialized before me, his eyes burning with rage. He lunged at me, and we engaged in a brutal, desperate struggle. He was strong, his movements fueled by supernatural fury, but I fought back with everything I had. Using the tools I had gathered along the way, I managed to fend him off, delivering blow after blow. Finally, I used the key to unlock the cabinet and grabbed the original doll. The dollmaker's ghost let out a piercing wail, his form flickering and distorting. With a heavy mallet, I smashed the doll, its porcelain face shattering into pieces. The ghost screamed in agony, his form disintegrating into a cloud of smoke. The other dolls in the room fell lifeless to the ground, their glassy eyes losing their sinister glow. The moment the original doll was destroyed, the mansion itself seemed to come alive. The walls shook and the floor trembled as the curse was lifted. The house began to collapse, the very foundation crumbling beneath me. I ran through the halls, dodging falling debris and avoiding collapsing floors. I burst out the front door just as the mansion fell in on itself. The once grand structure now reduced to a pile of rubble. I stood in the overgrown garden, breathing heavily, watching as the house that had nearly claimed my life was no more. As I drove away, I couldn't help but reflect on the lives lost to the dollmaker's madness. Their souls were finally free, but the experience had left a mark on me. I vowed to ensure their story was known, a warning to others about the dangers that lurk in forgotten places. The rent was irresistible, a price I could hardly believe for a downtown studio in a building with the kind of elegance that only age can grant. The Hawthorne Arms stood solid and stubborn, a relic of the city's early 20th century charm, complete with wrought iron railings and marble floors. It was the kind of place where history clung to the walls like layers of old paint. Unit 314 seemed just the right size for me, a freelance photographer barely scraping by on the meager earnings from scattered jobs. I shrugged off the sideways glances from the leasing agent when I signed the papers, and the muttered comment from a tenant in the elevator, "No one stays there long," as if I needed a warning. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside for the first time, the scent hit me immediately. Dust and something else, sweet and stale, like faded perfume. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was just another old building, nothing more. The studio stretched out in front of me, worn wooden floors, pale walls, and tall windows letting in the fading evening light. The space is utterly unremarkable, save for a faint chill in the air that seemed oddly out of place for a warm summer day. That first night I noticed the cold even more. It seeped into the room as the hours passed, an icy draft slipping through the seams in the walls. I kept the lights on longer than I usually would, clinging to the comfort of their warmth as I crawled into bed. The night seemed impossibly quiet and still, until I heard the footsteps. The first sounds were faint, almost as if the floorboards themselves were sighing. I lay awake, listening as the footsteps grew more distinct. They moved slowly, circling the room with an irregular, halting rhythm, as though whoever, or whatever it was, didn't know where to go. The sound stopped just outside my bedroom door, and I held my breath, heart pounding in the silence. But as quickly as the noise had started, it was gone, leaving nothing but the dark and unnerving quiet. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just the natural setting of an old building, nothing to be afraid of. But a quiet unease began to settle into my bones, a sense that something wasn't right. By the end of the week, that unease had only grown stronger. It was around then that I started noticing the symbols. The carvings were faint, shallow etchings in the wood near the baseboards, almost camouflaged by years of dust and faded varnish. The first one I found was a small, circular design with jagged lines radiating out like a fractured sunburst. As I searched the apartment more thoroughly, I found others under the windowsill, along the closet door frame, even behind the old bathroom mirror. Each time I discovered another, that chill in the air seemed to deepen. I snapped photographs of the symbols out of habit, capturing their intricate details through my camera's lens. The symbols appeared to have a hidden significance, like remnants of a language that had been forgotten. As I took the last picture, an odd prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck, and I glanced over my shoulder. The apartment felt unnaturally still, as though it were holding its breath. As the second week passed, my curiosity about the apartment's mysteries became an obsession. The footsteps had become a nightly ritual, growing louder, more insistent. I could hear them moving from the living area to the hallway, pausing for a moment before fading away, retracing the same path over and over. It wasn't just the footsteps. Sometimes I would hear whispers, faint, broken words that seemed unmistakably human but too fragmented to make any sense. The walls seemed to expand and contract with a life of their own, as though something unseen was shifting just beneath the surface. Then came the knocking. One night, a peculiar tapping sound started up from the closet. It was steady, rhythmic, echoing through the wood. I felt my pulse quicken as I approached the door. My hand hovered over the knob for a moment before I pulled it open. Nothing inside, just my clothes and a few boxes stacked against the back wall. As soon as the door was opened, the knocking stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its place. I knelt down and began to inspect the closet's interior, tapping on the floorboards. One of them sounded hollow. I pulled back the worn carpet to reveal a small, square trapdoor with a rusted iron latch. My breath hitched as I ran my fingers over the surface. The symbols that adorned the apartment walls had been etched into the wood here as well, but deeper, more deliberate. It was as if someone had taken great care to mark this spot. Against all better judgment, I unlatched the trapdoor and pulled it open. A narrow wooden ladder descended into darkness. A musty draft wafted up, carrying with it the sour scent of damp earth and decay. I hesitated only for a moment before grabbing my phone and turning on the flashlight, which cut through the shadows to reveal stone walls covered in more symbols. These carvings seemed to crawl across the stone like veins, branching out in patterns that made my skin crawl. The chamber below was small, barely tall enough for me to stand up straight. The air was thick with mildew and the metallic tang of old blood. In the center lay a rusted chain, coiled like a serpent, attached to a metal ring embedded in the stone floor. A shudder ran through me as I took in the sight. I didn't need to be told what it might have been used for. The symbols around me began to throb faintly, pulsing with a silent, malevolent energy. I climbed back up and closed the trapdoor behind me, the weight of the chamber's secrets pressing against my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had woken up down there, something that now knew I was here. I threw myself into research, digging through old city archives and online forums, piercing together fragments of the building's history. The Hawthorne Arms, I learned, had been a sanitarium in the 1920s, run by a man named George Leister. His reputation was as cold and unforgiving as the winter wind. The sanitarium was intended for, quote, moral rehabilitation, a vague term that concealed a darker reality. There were stories of isolation, forced treatments, and even patients who had simply vanished. In an old photograph, I found Leicester's stern face staring back at me as he stood before the building. But what truly caught my attention was a blurry figure in one of the windows, a shadow that seemed oddly familiar. I couldn't shake the feeling I had seen it somewhere before, perhaps in the shifting play of light on my apartment walls, or in the dark corners of my dreams. The whispers in the apartment grew louder, as if they were responding to my digging. They seeped into my thoughts at all hours, even when I was wide awake, forming fragments of phrases in a language I didn't know. And the footsteps, no longer confined to the night, started echoing through the halls in the afternoons, moving up and down the hallway like a restless ghost. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard the trap door creak open on its own. I froze, staring at the dark gap in the floor across the room. A cold draft swept through, carrying with it a sound that wasn't quite a voice, but something more primal. A low, mournful groan that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The trap door stayed open the next day, almost as if it were waiting for me. I could feel the pull of the darkness below, a magnetism that seemed to draw me back. I resisted at first, but the gravity of the place was too strong. I climbed down the ladder again. My phone's light flickered and dimmed, casting the chamber into a murky twilight. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, pulsing in time with my own heartbeat. And then, out of the darkness, a shape emerged. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it, a figure hunched in the corner, its features obscured by shadow. It wasn't just a trick of the light. I could feel its presence pressing against my mind, as real as the stone beneath my feet. It moved slowly, unnaturally, like a marionette being pulled to life against its will. When it spoke, the voice was a hollow rasp that seemed to scrape against the walls. "You should not be here." A jolt of terror shot through me. I stumbled back, knocking into the ladder. The figure moved closer, and as it did, I saw its face, or rather, the absence of one. The features were blurred, smudged like an image half erased, leaving only hollow sockets where eyes should have been. The air around me thickened, closing in like the chamber itself was alive. Adrenaline surged through me and I clambered up the ladder, fingers slipping on the rungs as I scrambled to escape. I burst into the apartment, slamming the trapdoor shut behind me. The whispers swelled into a maddening roar, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. Some angry, some pleading, all desperate. I knew I had to leave, but the apartment wasn't going to let me go easily. As I packed, I noticed something strange. The photos I had taken of the symbols had changed. New markings appeared, darker and deeper than the original carvings. And in the background of one image, the shadowy figure stood, watching me. The pull of the chamber was stronger than ever, a force that seemed to reach out and wrap around me. My movements felt sluggish, and the whispers grew more commanding, urging me to stay, to listen. The temperature dropped sharply, and I watched frost creep along the window edges. With my suitcase in hand, I headed for the door, but froze when I saw it. Carved into the wood was a new symbol, a circular design with a central spiral that seemed to twist and spin as I stared at it. It pulsed like a heartbeat, echoing the rhythm of the footsteps that now filled my mind. The voices converged, a single command resonating through the room. "You will never leave." I yanked the door open and fled, abandoning the cursed apartment and its secrets. As I stumbled into the hallway, the temperature began to rise. The air, warming like the building itself, was letting me go. I cast one last glance at Unit 314, its open door gaping like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. Just as I turned to leave, I thought I saw a figure standing in the window, a shadow still as death, watching me go. And as the door to the building closed behind me, I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper on the cold air. "You will be back."